I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to all our other stations and our listeners on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I am here with my incredible co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, together Rebecca and I are about to create an unforgettable hour of radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about it in the ways that it affects you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of the trees and the flowers and bees and pretty much everyone and everything, because like it or not, we are all together here on this beautiful, tiny little world called Earth. And we have an incredible show lined up for you today. We are just going to chat about a few things in the next 15 minutes or so. And those things are going to be basically some experiences I've had this past week. Then we have an unfortunate interview with Stephany Seay from Roam Free Nation. She's going to tell us about some really incredible and disturbing events going on there with the Yellowstone Bison. I asked her on because it's really kind of a crisis situation there right now. Then we'll hear from our incredible patrons and sponsors. And then Rebecca, what will you be telling us about?
I'll be telling us about Wangari Mathai.
Wangari Mathai, okay. That's like a person, right?
It's a person.
A person, okay, right. It's not like a dish or something. Okay, and then we have ecological news, including, our last story is the biggest completely ignored story in U.S. media right now, and possibly one of the biggest completely ignored stories in U.S. media in history. So we'll talk about that in the second half of the show. And at any time during the show, you may call in, and please do, at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. Or you can text at 419-973-5841. Okay, so introduction. So the first little bit here, I had a situation where I actually drove across the continent this past week in the Wonder Van, which gets really great gas mileage, but still I left Tuesday morning and I drove all the way to Denver, and then I drove all the way back, and I got home by Thursday evening. So that was 34 hours of driving and 72 hours of time or something crazy like that. But one really cool experience I had during that trip was I stopped in a little town called Kearney, Nebraska, and we spent the night there, and happened to discover that Kearney is the sandhill crane capital of the world. Every year, sandhill cranes descend on Kearney from all over the planet, and in fact, there are 1 million cranes that come to Kearney And we happened to just by coincidence get there at the peak of the migration time. And so we went and saw the cranes, and it was just amazing. It was just awe-inspiring to have, and it was kind of overwhelming to be like, we went to a park where they have the cranes, and we went and they have them mostly during the day. What they do is in the evenings they spend their time at the Platte River, and then during the day they go out and they go to the fields. They go to the farmers' fields and they glean like corn and stuff that has fallen from the harvest. And it's a huge success story because just a few years ago, like 10 years ago, they only had about 600,000 a year. Now they're up to 1 million a year. So it's just an example of what happens when you do things right. When you say, we're going to help a species recover, we're going to make sure they have enough habitat, we're going to make sure that they're not being hunted into extinction. And so this is a great experience, and it's just a little reminder of the abundance, the bounty of nature. When you let nature get healthy, it will produce just tons and tons of critters and experiences. And it reminded me of when I was a lad, and I used to watch when I was a kid back in the 60s, this time of year, which is the migration time, the peak migration time, you could see flocks of birds that would last for hours going overhead, heading north from spending the wintering time down in like Mexico or South America. There's an echo of that with the sandhill cranes in Kearney right now, so I was very happy to see that. And that's spelled Kearney, Kearney, but people there all pronounce it Kearney. So then on Friday I had another kind of fun experience. Well, kind of fun. Had some friends over to the house, and they wanted to watch this documentary, which I had never seen before. It's called Plastic Island, and it was made in 2021, and it's all about Indonesia and the problems they're having with plastic waste, because it turns out that when China stopped taking plastic waste from the rest of the world, a lot of it just started going over to Indonesia. And it's a multifaceted problem. The Indonesians themselves produce a lot of plastic from single-use plastics. So like they put out 93 million straws every day. And as in most places, 90% of this plastic doesn't get recycled, and it ends up eventually in the oceans. And they were just showing, rafts and rafts of plastic off the coast of Indonesia. In the US, we used 500 million plastic straws, just to give you a little, one tiny little piece of the single-use plastic problem. And Europe, the European Union, they used to do 25.3 billion plastic straws every year. But back in 2021, the European Union banned a lot of single-use plastics. They banned plastic plates, plastic cutlery, straws, balloon sticks, and something called cotton buds. I'm not actually sure what a plastic cotton bud is, but they just went and banned them. And also, Indonesia did put a fee on like plastic bags. So now you can't get a free plastic bag, you have to pay extra, which cut their plastic bag use in half right away. And my point is that they made the decision and they improved. Europe went from 25.3 billion plastic straws a year to 0 because they just decided this is a bad thing, we're just going to stop. So they passed the necessary laws and regulations. And over again, we see that voluntary ideas, that, asking people to stop doesn't work compared to just passing a law and saying this is a bad thing, we need to stop doing it. European Union's next looking at eliminating plastic cups and those little plastic single-use shampoo bottles you get at hotels and stuff. So they're going at it piecemeal. They have, they're sort of eliminating one sector of plastic at a time. but at least they're on their way. Whereas in the US, single-use plastic is not going down. And watching this movie, watching Plastic Island, which in Indonesia, the name of is Palau Plastic, watching this movie where basically they have a rock star there named Gidi Robi, and he's made it his mission to eliminate single-use plastics in Indonesia, and it followed him around the country, and he was looking at all aspects of the problem. And it turns out that one of the things that's happening is that a lot of the plastic that's getting shipped to Indonesia is being used to simply as fuel. They're literally just taking that plastic and burning it in open furnaces and then using that to make things like tofu. And the smoke coming out of those smokestacks is full of dioxins and horrible, horrible chemicals and pollution. And the buildings in Indonesia, a lot of them don't have walls. A lot of them are just roofs. And so the smoke's going out the stacks and then blowing around, and I'm certain getting into the tofu that they're creating. And so it's just like this horrible, we're basically poisoning them. And we've got to stop because a lot of that plastic is coming from the US into Indonesia. So, but again, the lesson here is that when we decide to do it and when we actually pass laws to eliminate things like single-use plastic, that works. Just like when the people in Kearney, made it a point to to restore the sandhill crane populations, it worked terrific, and now they've got over 1 million every year. It's just this awesome thing to behold. So,
I sat in the Platte River.
oh, did you?
Yes, that would make a really good T-shirt, but they don't have them. Yeah.
I sat in the Platte.
I sat in the Platte. Yeah, it was over by Steamboat. Saratoga. It was by Saratoga.
It's an interesting
Colorado.
river. It's incredibly shallow.
And it just goes everywhere. It's so weird. It's like it looks like some pathetic little creek, but then 200 miles later, there pops up the damn Platte again.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. It's very interesting. So, all right, but now I think it's about time for us to go on to our guest, and unfortunately, this is a very unhappy interview. I just a few months ago we had our guest Stephany Seay from Roam Free Nation on to talk about what was going on with the bison, and the situation there has just deteriorated. It's incredibly bad for the bison right now in Yellowstone. So we're going to go to that, and you'll hear all about it in my interview with Stephany Seay. Go ahead, Josh. Hello, Stephany Seay. Welcome back to For a Green Future. If you could just remind us who you're with.
Hi, thank you so much for having me again. I'm the co-founder of Roam Free Nation. We're a Montana-based organization that focuses on the Yellowstone buffalo, but we also aid our allies in defending wild nature.
And it wasn't that long ago we had you on, but I decided we needed to bring you back on just a few months later because there's been some pretty alarming developments with the Yellowstone bison. What's been going on?
It's a killing frenzy in the Gardner Basin. It's nuts. Another report came out today. More than 30% of the population has been killed and or removed from the wild. It's shocking. We went into the fall with 6,000 buffalo. Now there's fewer than 4,100. And most of the killing has been done by hunters, if you want to call them that. It's really been a killing spree. Part of the problem is that when we were at the IBMP, Interagency Bison Management Plan meeting in late November, the Park Service usually comes up with a number that they want to remove from the population, which we never agree with. But they didn't do that this time. And part of us, we thought, well, maybe that's a good thing because the past bunch of winters have been so mild, there hasn't been a really large migration into the basin. And so there might not have been a big effort to try to capture or kill any. Well, that ended up backfiring because winter came hard and it came fast and it came really severe, and literally more than 2,000 buffalo migrated into the Gardner Basin, and over 1,000 of them have been killed in the hunt alone. 88 of them have been shipped to slaughter. There's another 282 that have been put into the quarantine / domestication program. Well, they're separated from their families. They'll never see their homes again. They'll be moved to strange places. It's just been awful. It's been absolutely awful. 30%. This is the most significant slaughter since the 19th century. And all this is happening while the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is considering Endangered Species Act protection for these herds, and it could not come soon enough.
This is incredible. I mean, we were kind of led to believe that they might be a little less bloodthirsty this year because...
Well, it's the hunters are going nuts. I mean, there are, like, I've been to Gardner a few times to patrol, and what I've seen, it's just nuts. I mean, gut piles as far as you can see all over the landscape and all the hunting areas, and just big trucks showing up every day full of people with rifles and going out and shooting as many buffalo as they can. But it was interesting. We were there just last week, and it was so quiet. There was over 1,000 buffalo in the basin. And we were like, what is going on? Have they realized the error of their ways? Have they realized the damage they've already caused? And there was and this is weird to say, there were only 5 buffalo killed in the 4 days that we were there. The last time I was there, there was over 100, maybe over 200 killed in the span of 4 days. So it was relatively quiet, and we were wondering, but no, it really picked up again, and they're not stopping. There's no satisfaction. It's just a killing spree, and it's bad. It's really, really bad. And Yellowstone is also holding, how many they have? Over 300, almost 375 buffalo that they are holding for either slaughter or release. We need them to release them. This is over the top. And this also goes on the heels of, at that same interagency bison management plan meeting, so we went into the fall, into the season with 6,000 buffalo. Yellowstone Park biologist Chris Jeremiah came out, and the superintendent as well, came out publicly stating that the park alone can sustain upwards of 10,000 buffalo. Then in a recent interview with Chris Jeremiah, the bison biologist, he said 11,000. So they're like hammering these buffalo when it's really hard to find the words for it. This is out of control. Things are really out of control. And everyone wants to wash their hands and say, well, we're not responsible for this. Oh, well, it's their fault for doing that. It's like, no, all these guys work on consensus at this interagency bison management plan. So they all agree to the things that are taking place. It's really bad right now. It is so bad.
And in fact, I saw one of your posts that the number already taken so far is actually higher than the limits any of the members of the interagency task force have set previously.
Including the Department of Livestock. It's gone beyond what they even would consider acceptable, which is always high.
Basically, by not setting a number to end at, the park is just letting the slaughter just continue. Could it continue to, 50%?
If they don't stop. And we don't see, so most of the hunts will end. So you've got now 10 tribes hunting under treaty right there. There's been 3 more who have joined this year. And so there's more people on the ground. And with all these buffalo coming into the Gardner Basin, I mean, they are taking every opportunity, and it's just out of control. And I don't see it stopping. Most of the tribes will be done by the end of March. But we've still got a couple of weeks of March left. And in a couple of weeks, a couple more 100 or more buffalo could definitely get shot and killed or wounded and run into the park. The Park Service has had the unfortunate job of having to dispatch, euthanize, I don't know what you want to call it, kill 24 buffalo who were just wounded by hunters who were really terrible shots. And they went back into the park, and they were so terribly wounded that the park rangers had to deal with it. And Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has had to do the same thing for another 10 buffalo. So, I mean, it's a war zone out there. It is 100% war zone.
Are any non-native hunters still in the hunt, or has that?
No, that ended February 15th.
Well, that's something, but yeah.
And I mean, compared to, what is it? There were 75 total taken by state hunters. The rest were by tribal hunters. And that total number is 1,067, according to these agencies. And 75 out of that 1,067 were state hunters. The rest were all by tribal hunters.
And in the meetings, the tribes, I think, are the ones that are pushing the hardest for the increase in the numbers, right?
They are. But it's like that is not going to be achieved by the actions you display on the ground. You cannot call for more buffalo on a larger landscape and come into the Gardner Basin or West Yellowstone Hebgen Basin and do what you're doing and kill them like this and then expect there to be, recovery or restoration. I mean, it's ridiculous. It doesn't work like that. You know what I mean? I mean, you have to refrain. You have to take a step back and look at how your actions are preventing the very thing that you say you want.
So who does have the authority here to say enough for this year? It's time to stop.
It's going to have to come from each tribe. It's going to have to come from Yellowstone releasing the buffalo that they have in the capture facility still. I mean, there's so many different players with their own sovereignty and their own jurisdictions. I mean, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I am not a lawyer, so I don't know if this is a fact, but I would imagine the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, there could be some kind of emergency declaration, say, hey, no, enough is enough. These guys, this is so bad. You need to stop. But most of these hunts should be over by the end of March. There will be some tribes who more discreetly than what's taking place now may continue to hunt throughout the spring, but it wouldn't be like what we're seeing right now. And another thing that's really sad that's still happening is that most of the tribes have regulations that say you can't kill adult females after beginning of March, because they're getting so close to calving season. That's not happening. I mean, the adult females are still being killed. And I mean, it's barely 6 weeks away from calving season. It's a month to 6 weeks away from calving season.
And now these hunters, for the most part, are still using lead shot. That correct?
Lead, yep. And so now here's another. So you've got all these gut piles full of lead, full of poison, that all these ravens, bald eagles, golden eagles, coyotes, wolves, grizzly bears who are now waking up are going to be exposed to. I mean, I don't know if you saw any of my photos from when I was in Gardner earlier in the winter, from walking Beatty Gulch, and it's worse now, but it's like there's gut piles like every 3 feet. Every 3 feet is a gut pile. And it's so bad that the Forest Service, and I guess they got some assistance from the Montana Department of Livestock, have started doing gut pile cleanup, removing some of the gut piles. What hunt have you ever heard of any species where it is so concentrated and so bad that they come in and remove gut piles? That is a testament unto itself about how terrible this thing is.
I remember back in the early days of the Buffalo Field campaign, I mean, you folks kind of made national news because people were going out and sort of putting themselves between the bison and the hunters. Do you think that's anything like that is a possibility now?
It's a possibility. Buffalo Field campaign never did that. That was something that they got blamed for doing and never went away, but they never did that. And it is definitely possible, but you have to be willing to take a bullet for a buffalo, because that could very well happen. And it is not legal, obviously. Montana has some pretty strong laws that protect hunters from actions like that. But it's not impossible.
Now, so we're talking just about a third of the herd. I mean, taking that many animals, doesn't that make it possible for things like genetic weaknesses to creep into the herd?
Definitely. Definitely. And the scariest part is because so much of this is happening in Gardner. In West, there's been 42 killed out of a total of 1,814. 42 have been taken in West. And in West, we know those are central herd buffalo, and they're an imperiled population. And we've known this for years. The central herd also migrates into the Gardner Basin. So they're getting doubly hammered by management actions by this so-called hunt, which is more of a slaughter. And we don't know. Nobody knows, not even the Park Service knows, how many of this 1,814 buffalo are from the central herd, except for the ones who were killed in West Yellowstone, because they're the only ones who migrate into West Yellowstone. So we may go into, and we won't know until they do their summer population estimate. We won't know how many buffalo from either the central or the northern herd got hammered. We're not going to know the numbers until they do the population estimate in the summer.
So what's the worst case scenario if the most sensitive population had the biggest percentage of bison taken?
That is the worst case scenario.
That
is if the central herd had the bigger percentage, then there would probably be very few left.
Which is the herd that people are most likely to see if they're like a tourist going to Yellowstone?
Well, they'll see both, because the Hayden Valley is kind of the summer rut grounds for the central herd, and the Lamar Valley is the summer rut grounds for the northern herd. And both are very popular, very famous. I think probably the Lamar is a little more so. They'll see both. I mean, if you're going to Yellowstone, you're going to cover all that ground that you possibly can. Maybe they won't see any buffalo in the Hayden Valley. We don't know. We won't know until summer the impact on which herd, who felt the brunt of it all. It's just so sad. It's just so sad because, with these hunts, it's like for the tribes, and as they say, it's an issue of sovereignty. It's an issue of treaty right. It's like, yeah, but is it right? This population is being considered for Endangered Species Act protection. Why do you have to come out and kill so many? Why does it have to be this way? Why can't there be any reciprocity? Why can't there be any kind of honorable harvest? It's just nuts what's going on. I mean, I don't know if you saw, we have friends who live right at Beatty Gulch, right across this gravel road that's called Old Yellowstone Trail, right across the street from Beatty Gulch. And they hear gunshots all day long, every day. And on this one warm day, and these are friends, they're from Yellowstone Voices. People should check them out. This woman, Bonnie Lynn, she's been working on this issue. I met her when I first got to Montana 20 years ago. And she's got an awesome webcam set up so she can zoom in and see what's going on, things you can't see if you're just on the ground. And so every day she's getting reports. Every day she's able to see things that are going on. And she had one of her tech guys come out who's actually been helping her with a documentary that should be coming out soon. He went up to Beatty Gulch, and it was a warm day, and there was literally a creek of blood running down Beatty Gulch. And there's a video of this. And it's just, the ravens in the background, and I don't know if you saw that clip, but it's profound. And that was almost a month ago, and hundreds more have already been killed.
Well, I'm sorry, Stephany, we're just about out of time.
I'm sorry, this is so depressing.
Yeah, if people want to follow you, get more information, what should they do?
Come to roamfreenation.org and visit us on Facebook, Roam Free Nation. We'll let you know what's going on and what to do. And just, please plug in and pay attention and do what you can, because this herd can't take what's.
So, sorry to have such a downer on such a beautiful day, but I think it's important that people know what's happening to literally the last wild herd of bison in the United States. All the other bison are domesticated, they're in fences, and they're being crossbred with cattle. And, those aren't what you would consider wild bison that have the whole rich bison culture that gets passed on from generation to generation, with the older bison teaching the younger bison. And that's another effect of this kind of slaughter, where you get rid of a third of the herd at a time. You lose a lot of that wisdom that bison have been passing on to each other for literally millions of years. So that's it. Stephany wanted me to mention that one thing they're doing to try to raise awareness down there is they've rented a lot of bulletin boards, or billboards, excuse me, and they are putting up signs teaching people about what's going on. So hopefully they can have some effect. Okay, now on to pleasanter things, and one of the very pleasant things we have to report on every week is support from our patrons and sponsors. And I'm gonna do patrons first this year in order to not forget them, because I forgot to mention them again last week. But we could not be bringing you this show without the support of our patrons. Wonderful, wonderful people who've gone to patreon.com. That's Patreon. They searched for Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page, and they went on there and chose a monthly donation that they can afford. Comes right out of their account, comes over to us every month, and that's the only way that we've been able to afford to bring you this show for all this time. And we've been at this for a while, haven't we, Rebecca?
We have.
Yeah, and it's all thanks to our patrons and our advertisers. I also want to thank our advertisers. For Green Futures, brought to you by the Eco-Fill Shop. The Eco-Fill Shop is located at 115 West Mary in Bowling Green, Ohio. They sell lots of different things: cosmetics, bath and body, home and garden, cleaning, towels, knickknacks, candles, fragrances, and more. They sell all these things without plastic containers. The whole purpose of the Eco-Fill Shop is to eliminate the use of plastics. Customers love them. Summer says that I'm loving the products they offer. It's sensible and affordable, all while being eco-friendly and plant-based, eliminating the unnecessary use of chemicals. And that's just one of the many glowing testimonials you'll see at their website, ecofillshop.com. And I am one of their customers. Before I came in, I used my shaving soap that I bought from there with my little brush. And that's how I got my shave this morning. I'm also trying a new product I got there I've never seen before. It's a toothpaste tablet that instead of having a paste that you squeeze from a tube, there's a little tablet that you chew, and it kind of foams up in your mouth, and you brush your teeth that way. It's interesting. I've only used it once so far, but I think I might be switching. If you're interested in what the Eco-Fill Shop has to offer, you can call them at 419-944-8862. That's 419-944-8862. Talk to the owner, and I've been mispronouncing her name. It's Josie, Joci. Josie, and she loves the environmental issues. That's why she opened this store. And you can also check out their website, ecofillshop.com, or better yet, just drop in 115 West Mary in Bowling Green, Ohio. That's the Eco-Fill Shop. And For Green Futures, also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, they provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And there's a bunch of ways to find out what they're doing. One is to go to their website, which is simply wcparks.org. That's wcparks.org. You can also search for them on social media. They're on Twitter and Instagram and all those social places. Just search for WC Parks. And finally, you can give them a call at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. That's the Wood County Park District. All right, now that brings us to your portion of the show. Rebecca, what do you have to share with us this week?
Alrighty. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit in honor of Women's History Month, which is still going on, about a woman named Wangari Mathai, who I personally had not ever heard of before. But yeah, she was born in 1940 in a small village in Kenya. And she was part of something called the African Airlift, or the Kennedy Airlift Program for Africa in the year 1960, which is just a very dramatic name for letting 300 Kenyans get sent to college in America, basically. So she came over here. She went to the Benedictine College and the University of Pittsburgh, and also studied in the University of Gießen, Germany. And eventually she got her master's in biology, and then went on to get her PhD at Nairobi. There we go. So yeah, and in 1977 she founded something called the Green Belt Movement, which trained 30,000 women, planted 51 million trees. In addition to planting trees, their focus is on help train people to make a living in ecologically sustainable ways. She won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004, which made her the first African woman to ever get that award, and it was basically for her involvement in environmental conservation and women's rights. And there's been one of her big things, a great quote that she said was, "Poor people will cut down the last tree to cook the last meal. The more you degrade the environment, the more you deepen into poverty. You dig deeper into poverty." Very true. Yeah, and that's something that's always got to be addressed, because she saw, firsthand, those were the years in Kenya when things were going downhill, the environment and the economy at the same time. And also, apparently, besides that, there's been a big problem in Kenya with the agricultural industry tends to seize farmland and forest for their own purposes, which the poor people were using in both cases. So it is about the poor people, but it's also they have a common enemy in the agricultural industry. Initially, she had a lot of battles with the repressive Kenyan regime in the late 20th century. She was elected to parliament in Kenya in 2002, and became assistant minister in the Ministry for the Environment and Natural Resources. In 2010, she founded the Wangari Mathai Institute for something, Peace and Environmental Studies. Yeah, that's what it was. And she's also written some random things. She got the Right Livelihood Award in 1984, the Mahatma Gandhi Peace Prize in 2006, and died of ovarian cancer on 25th of September 2011. That's there's a bunch of there's 3 or 4 articles put together. There's a bunch of articles on the same woman.
Oh, I actually didn't know she'd passed away. Well, that's sad.
Yeah, it is.
But she was an amazing woman. I remember when she won the Peace Prize, and it was really people were kind of like, why is it environmentalists winning the Peace Prize? But
what do those have to do with each other? It's not like people fight over resources when you destroy them.
Exactly. I mean, it really kind of opened up the conversation and made it clear that those two things are linked. The worse off your environment is, the more likely you are to start getting into fights and stuff. So,
True.
All right. Well, thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
Excellent report. And now on to ecological news. So we got a whole bunch to get through this week, including, as I said, the last story, the most uncovered story, one of the biggest, most repressed stories in American media in history, I'd be willing to say. All right, but first we go to New Mexico, and there's a story in Inside Climate News. As enforcement falls short, many worry that companies are flouting New Mexico's landmark gas flaring rules. And what happened is, in New Mexico, they've got a lot of fracking, and they said, one of the biggest problems with fracking is that they put methane into the atmosphere, which is much worse in terms of fossil fuels than carbon dioxide. So they passed all these laws, these regulations. They said you got to burn it off, but you have to trap it. They're aiming for 98% methane capture by 2026. The problem is, in New Mexico, despite all this these great laws that they have not got people enforcing it. And they're depending on the fracking companies to self-report. And what's happening is the people on the ground are saying there hasn't been any change. That there's just as much flaring as there was, even though now it's against the law. And, depending on companies to catch themselves and penalize themselves for breaking environmental laws, doesn't work. It just never works. And so the EPA and NASA decided to do some testing with satellites and flyovers, and they found there's just as much methane as ever. So New Mexico's got to get on the ball. It's nice they passed these great laws, but if you don't enforce them, then what's the point? So there's that news. Next to Taiwan, and this is one of those stories. As you know, I allow myself a day of complete bliss whenever a nuclear plant closes. A nuclear plant closed.
Yay!
Yeah.
Happy times for Joe.
Right. It was a beautiful day. It was a plant that was in Taiwan, it's unit 2 of a 2-plant. So the other plant had already closed. It reached the end of its life. It came online 40 years ago in March of '83, and they're only designed to last 40 years, and so it's perfectly reasonable to end it at the end of its 40-year life. And that's, what's going on in the rest of the world is they're keeping these plants open beyond their design life and risking terrible accidents and meltdowns and failures. But in Taiwan, they said, you know what? It's designed for 40 years. We're going to run it for 40 years. And then they shut it down. Now, unfortunately, it looks like they're going to replace the generation at this point with mostly gas and coal. They're actually putting on 2 new coal plants, which is terrible. They are starting to develop their wind and tiny bit of solar. The Taiwan Straits actually is a really good wind resource. They're going to start putting some offshore wind turbines in there. Too slow. Their ambitions, their targets are not high enough. But at least they shut down the nukes, and so I'm very happy about that. And one thing about Taiwan that's kind of interesting, they're the only other nation in the world that has copied the U.S. Constitution. They have, just like us, they've got a House of Representatives and a Senate and a president, and everybody else that's a democracy has a parliament, which is a whole nother animal, very different in many ways. But the party that's in power got elected in 2016 by promising to make Taiwan a nuclear-free homeland. And as Taiwan is looking at what's happening in Ukraine, and how Ukraine is literally every day on the verge of a nuclear disaster because Russia is attacking their nuke plants and threatening to blow them up. Taiwan, it hardened Taiwan's resolve, and they're going to go completely nuclear free. And they've only got 2 plants left, and those are going to close in 2024 and 2025. And so I have at least 2 more days of bliss to look forward to. So, all right, that was good. Now on to Europe, where they're still fighting over nuclear power. Germany and Spain. Here's a title: Germany and Spain push to keep nuclear out of EU renewable energy goals. This is a story by Reuters, which came out on March 16th. And basically, Denmark, Germany, Spain, Austria, Ireland, Luxembourg, and Portugal are all saying that we shouldn't have nuclear in the plan to become carbon-free for the European Union, that it's not truly carbon-free, which, we've gone over the reasons for that in past episodes. But unfortunately, France, Poland, and the Czech Republic are pushing to get nuclear into the plans to become carbon-free, and especially they want to focus on what's called low-carbon hydrogen. In other words, making hydrogen fuel from nuclear power plants. And that's happening more and more around the world. And I have to ask, storing a highly explosive gas on the site of a nuclear power plant, what could go wrong there?
Slightly concerning, perhaps.
Yeah. But Germany and Spain and the other countries are insisting that renewable means wind and solar and not nuclear. So let's hope they prevail in that bureaucratic battle that's going on in the EU. Next story. Oh wait, are we already there? No, okay. No, I'm going to go back. I had them out of order here. The EPA has finally released its limits in drinking water for PFAS, and they are incredible. In drinking water, they are trying to limit the amount of PFAS to 0.004 parts per trillion. And that's actually 4 parts per quadrillion. So they're saying that in order for drinking water to be safe, like if you have a quadrillion atoms, only one of those atoms could be PFAS, which
Oh my.
yeah, which is like
That's a lot of atoms.
right, yeah, it's unbelievable. Now to be specific, that's for what they call PFOA, and these are all different kinds of PFAS. For another sort that's called PFOS, it's 0.02 parts per trillion. Then they tried to make this safer version. The chemists that have been doing it, they call Gen X PFASs. Those they can have, they say, oh, it's okay for up to 10 parts per trillion, which is still an incredibly tiny amount. And then PFBSs can have up to 2,000 parts per trillion. This is all in drinking water. And it's, this is what I have to say, this is what you call bass backwards. Because what they're doing is they're letting the stuff get made and then regulating how much of it can end up in the drinking water. Now,
It's got to go someplace.
Right.
If you're making it, it's got to go someplace, and no place it can go is going to be good.
Exactly. The first thing you should do, I mean, if it's toxic at those levels, 4 parts per quadrillion, we should not be making it.
Yeah.
So it's not, we shouldn't, it's kind of pointless to try to regulate something at those levels in drinking water when at those levels, I mean, if you, any production of it is going to put you over the acceptable limit. And so it's kind of crazy that we're doing it this way. First putting it into the environment and then trying to regulate how much we end up eating or drinking. Now, if you look up PFAS, there's some very contradictory information about it on the internet. One says that we're not making it in the US anymore, but then other sources are saying it's commonly used, like in the lining of pizza boxes or in the paper that we wrap hamburgers in. So it appears, so on the one hand, they're claiming we're not making it anymore, but on the other hand, they're claiming we're using it every day in stuff that we're using. And if you can only take 4 parts per quadrillion, if you're going to eat a piece of pizza that's come within 5 feet of a PFAS coated pizza box,
Wait.
you're going to be eating more than the safe limit. So it's just kind of crazy, but they did it. They came out with it and said that's what the safe limit is. Now this is just in drinking water. And one important thing to note, so a lot of people are going to go, well, I'll just use bottled water. But the thing is that the EPA doesn't actually regulate PFAS in bottled water. So even though they're saying to municipal water suppliers, you can only have 4 parts per quadrillion, which most municipalities won't even be able to test for limits that low. Like we reported a couple weeks ago, most state laboratories can only do like 1 part per trillion, which is still an amazing level, but 4 parts per quadrillion, nobody could test at that levels that low. But that's all drinking water. There's no regulation on bottled water, so switching from your tap to the bottled water is not going to be a way to avoid PFAS. So yeah, so there's that story. All right, now final story, and this is the one that I said I've been teasing all hour here. Have you heard of Cyclone Freddy? And
I had not.
you had not, right? Rebecca didn't hear about it till just before the show. But Cyclone Freddy, now a cyclone is a hurricane. It's just a hurricane in the Pacific as opposed to the Atlantic. And Cyclone Freddy has just ended. It was the longest cyclone ever. It lasted 36 days. And it was also the most powerful storm ever in history by a huge factor because it lasted so long. The amount of energy it released was, I forget what it's like 4 or 5 times the next biggest storm. And what it did was it formed off the coast of Australia, and then it attacked Africa. It pummeled Africa. It first hit Madagascar, and then it went on to Mozambique, and then it went back into the ocean. It hit Madagascar, Mozambique, went back into the Pacific, super strengthened again, and then came back onto Africa and smashed into Mozambique again.
Ew.
And then it went on to trash Malawi and other countries in Africa. More than 400 people were killed. More than, tens upon tens of thousands were made homeless. Incredible damage to infrastructure. Roads completely wiped out. And this should have been headlines around the world because this is another one of the examples of a global warming enhanced storm. You know, the ocean was so hot that the storm was able to first make landfall, then go back out and get back all the way back up to full strength again and last over a month. I mean, this is all incredible, unheard of. Meteorologists were panicking and running around screaming and stuff. And we didn't hear about it. And I think the reason we didn't hear about it, well, there's 2 reasons. One, our media is completely obsessed with this whole idea of will they indict Trump or won't they? You know, what's he wearing? What's his latest tweet? You know, they're focused on nothing else. I mean, I try to listen to the quote unquote news stations, and this is all they talk about when this incredible cyclone hit Africa. And the other reason is, of course, that it is Africa. And we tend to ignore the issues and the problems in Africa. So not a good look for the world, not a good case of reporting. And you have to really wonder how things like this end up in the wastebasket at like CNN and MSNBC and even Fox News. You know, why aren't you paying attention to the strongest cyclone ever that's lasted the longest and has done incredible amounts of damage to Africa? And these poor countries that are getting hit, like Mozambique and like Malawi and Madagascar.
There's all the M's.
Right. They're announcing that they have like $4 million and like $6 billion and a couple $1 million here and there to rebuild and repair when the damage clearly is in the billions. You know, these countries literally just don't have the credit. Like if something like this happened to the US, we would just borrow enough money to make it whole again. You know, we would say, you know, our president would get on there and say, we're going to repair Florida or whatever, and pledge like 20 or 40 billion dollars to try to rebuild everything. These countries in Africa don't get that opportunity. In fact, Malawi is still reeling. They were hit by another cyclone 4 years ago, and their infrastructure still has not been repaired from that one. So this is really big, terrible news. And like I say, this is probably the least covered story in the world right now. And so cyclone season isn't over yet, but we'll see what happens for the rest of the season down there. But it's really just terrible. All right, well, actually I thought that would be the last story, but it turns out we got just another couple of minutes, and that will allow me to do a story I didn't get to last week. And that is the Energy Information Agency back on October. They were bragging They were saying that their headline is daily U.S. summer nuclear capacity outages were 19% lower in 2022. But so they, in 2021, they had 51 unplanned outages. That's nuke plants that crash and have to be taken off the grid. And emergency backup power has to go on to make sure that they don't melt down. Happened 51 times in 2021, but only 24 times in 2022.
No.
The thing is that means that's 75. That means about every 10 days, a nuclear plant in the United States crashes and has to be taken offline. An emergency backup power has to come from a coal plant or a natural gas plant to make up the gigawatts of electricity that drop out. So these pro-nukers that say nuclear is this dependable baseload power, they're lying. If you look at the numbers, it's kind of crazy.
To be quite blunt, they are lying.
They are lying. All right, well, thank you so much for listening. And, let's stick with it, folks, because as I said at the beginning, if we make the decisions and pass the laws, we can fix these problems. So that's it for this week. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
We are signing off.
No. I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun